because he is a very good speaker and he is a very good teacher as well. He is a very good academician. So we will invite Dr. Satya for his lecture without wasting time.
Thank you very much. A very good evening to everybody.
I think Dr. Satya is muted.
No,
The audio is low, sir.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Still it is low, sir.
Lowest on the volume. Okay. It's still low only?
It is fine.
This is better.
Yeah.
Fine, sir.
Better, okay. Is it much better now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay. So, shall I start showing the slides?
Please, sir.
Full screen. Just a second. Slideshow. From beginning. A very good evening to one and all. I hope the slides, etc., are now visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And my audio is good now.
It is good, sir.
Okay, right. So thank you so much, everybody, for inviting me to speak on recent advances in the treatment of adult soft tissue sarcoma. And Nurture the Future is an excellent initiative by all the three masters in the field of oncology across the entire country and beyond as well. So I clearly understand that this is intended to make sure that the residents, the trainees, be it DM or DNBs, the lecture should be useful to them. So what I did was, when the topic was given to me, I also tried to look at the question bank and see what questions come on soft tissue sarcomas. So like this was a question in December 2017 about cytogenetic translocation studies in sarcomas and mentioned that tumors where it's useful in diagnosis, or the pathology of STS and the IHC markers which are useful to come at the diagnosis in June 2017. And also they mentioned about listing the molecular level abnormalities for 3 soft tissue sarcomas. And then when I also looked at some more question banks, there were some questions asked about translational research in soft tissue sarcoma. Twice the question came as histological classification of soft tissue sarcomas, and then there was also a question about novel targets and molecules for the treatment of soft tissue sarcomas. So this is what I could gather by looking at some of the question banks, and some questions also like imatinib in non-CML indications, targeted therapy in solid cancers, drug resistance, short notes on STI 571. Now, when I joined my DM way back in 2001, it was around at that time that imatinib got available. It was initially called as STI because it is a signal transduction inhibitor, and STI 571 essentially is imatinib. And then some role and recent trends in the practice of oncology. So in my talk today, what I plan to do is touch upon all these questions which have come in the theory for the DM and the DNB residents in medical oncology, and hope it's useful to them in their clinical, in their examinations going forward. So let's start.
Yes, sir, excuse sir.
Yes.
1 second, sir. The voice is not so clear like earlier. Can we once again check the audio? Hari, earphones also, sir.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, absolutely fine, sir. Perfect.
Okay, right. So let me start introductions. That STS RFO, is it fine now?
Yes, sir. Perfectly.
Absolutely fine, sir.
Very good. So these are rare and heterogeneous tumors. They account for 1% of all adult malignancies. They encompass different histology and molecular subtypes, and each subtype may have variable clinical behavior. The incidence is low, around 1%, and on top of that, variable presentation, behavior, long-term outcome. Therefore, it underscores the importance of having a centralized care in specialized centers with a multidisciplinary team approach. Now, the site and patterns of spread To your left, you see that lower extremity site is the most common, around 28%. Now, this was a paper which was a few years back, but then a recent paper also in June 2020 tells that 35% of them are from the lower extremity to your right. But then, as you can see, you can find them virtually across all parts of the body: head and neck, upper limb, lower extremity, retroperitoneum, trunk, uterus, and gastrointestinal. So with that, I divide my talk into a few sections, and in section number 1, I will talk about the sarcoma sample subtypes which they have seen across these various, seen by the American Academy of Cancer Research. And you find that the sarcoma subtypes have been given different colors, and this is how it looks like. So what you can see is that sarcomas encompass such a broad number of subtypes that it looks so colorful here. Now, WHO has classified tumors of soft tissue and bone, and they mentioned that we have more than 100 different histologic subtypes of soft tissue tumors. The reason I thought I'll talk about this is because one of the DNB or the DM questions has been classification of tumors of soft tissue or soft tissue sarcomas. Now, each of these STS has unique prognostic, clinical, and therapeutic features. Of all the subtypes, the 3 most common across various regions have been number 1, liposarcoma, number 2, leiomyosarcoma, and number 3 is UPS or undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma. So these 3 are very, very important because they are the most common histiotypes: liposarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, and undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma. The usual approach to classification of soft tissue tumors or sarcomas is to look at the cell lineage and then base it on some morphology, IHC, and some gene features. Currently, we classify them as from the cell of origin, like adipocytic, fibroblastic, fibrohistiocytic, smooth muscle, pericytic, skeletal muscle, etc. So let's try to look at this chart here, which is the WHO classification of soft tissue tumors, and they've actually listed 55 subtypes here when you plan to look at each of these. Now, it's not possible to remember all these 55 subtypes, and more than that, to pen it down in the examination when a theory paper is given to you about the WHO classification of soft tissue tumors or soft tissue sarcomas. The vast proportion of these are soft tissue sarcomas. Let me try to see if I can simplify it so that you will be able to pen it down as an answer to an examination question. So the first, because if I keep on reading each of these 55 subtypes, this is going to be the reaction from almost all of you. So let me see if I can try to simplify this. So the first would be smooth muscle tumors. An example of that would be leiomyosarcoma. The second is adipocytic tumors. Adipocytic meaning the fat. So therefore, liposarcomas, well differentiated, dedifferentiated, myxoid round cell subtype, pleomorphic, and not otherwise specified, as well as atypical lipomatous tumors. Third category could be the rhabdomyosarcomas, which means the skeletal muscle. So that could be embryonal subtype, alveolar, pleomorphic, and spindle cell or sclerosing rhabdomyosarcoma. And then chondro-osseous tumors, and that chondro means cartilage, so soft tissue chondroma, osseous means bone, so extraskeletal osteosarcoma. Then you could have the myofibroblastic and the nerve sheath tumors. So under the category of myofibroblastic, you would be having DFSP, dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, the conventional type, fibrosarcomatous type, pigmented type, inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor or IMFT, malignant SFT, SFT standing for solitary fibrous tumor, myxofibrosarcoma, low-grade fibromyxoid sarcoma, and adult fibrosarcoma. So these are all which would come in the category of the myofibroblastic tumors. Nerve sheath tumors, I think, would be easy because MPNST or malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, conventional type and epithelial type, malignant triton tumor, and malignant granular cell tumor. So when you divide them into such categories, it becomes easy for us to remember almost a good number of the subtypes of soft tissue sarcomas. Now, angiosarcomas and other vascular tumors. So angiosarcoma of the soft tissue, angioendotheliomas, hemangioendotheliomas, and Kaposi's sarcomas. Now, all of these are vascular tumors. And then you could have perivascular tumors like the malignant glomus tumor. So this would come under the heading of angiosarcomas and other vascular tumors. Lastly, sarcomas of uncertain differentiation or undifferentiated and unclassified. So under uncertain differentiation would be synovial sarcomas, conventional spindle cell, monophasic, biphasic, ASPS, which is alveolar soft part sarcoma, clear cell sarcoma of the soft tissue, extraskeletal Ewing's, DSRCT or desmoplastic small round cell tumor. So these all are tumors of uncertain differentiation. Now, for example, let us look at the clear cell sarcoma of soft tissue, which is also called as the soft part melanomas. But then there's quite a lot of difference between melanomas and the melanoma of the skin and the melanoma of the soft part of clear cell sarcoma. For example, you find usually translocation 1222 in clear cell sarcoma of the soft tissue, and which is not what you see in melanomas. In melanomas, you find that the immune checkpoint inhibitors work very well, and they don't work at least as well as that in the clear cell sarcoma of soft tissue. Now you find BRAF and NRAS mutations in melanomas of the skin, but in soft part clear cell sarcomas, you don't find these mutations. So these are tumors of uncertain differentiation: synovial sarcomas, epithelioid sarcomas, ASPS, clear cell sarcomas of soft tissue, extraskeletal Ewing's, and desmoplastic small round cell tumor, etc. Finally, undifferentiated or unclassified, and as I told you at the beginning, you have liposarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, and UPS. Now these are the three most common histiotypes. So UPS is undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma, and so also could be spindle cell sarcoma, round cell sarcoma, epithelioid sarcoma, or not otherwise specified. The last category comes in others. For example, GI stromal tumor or GIST, and giant cell tumor of soft tissue. So both of them are GIST, and giant cell tumor of the soft tissues. Now, since we are talking about taking home a message as to how to remember all this, my conclusion one would be, to your right is the entire list of the 55 subtypes of the WHO classification of soft tissue tumors. To remember that, you could actually remember sarcomas, with S being the smooth cell tumors, smooth muscle tumors, A, adipocytic tumors, R, rhabdomyosarcomas, C, chondroosseous tumors, O, others, and there you have GIST and the giant cell tumor, myo of soft tissue, myofibroblastic and nerve sheath tumors, angiosarcomas, other vascular and perivascular tumors, and sarcomas, uncertain, undifferentiated, unclassified. So in this way, you can possibly remember almost a good number of the most important sarcoma subtypes. Now, this presentation has already been given to my colleagues in INTAS, and this presentation can be shared to whichever student wants it. So you don't have to actually note down. You can just keep on listening to this, and afterwards the presentation can be taken from any of my INTAS colleagues. So that's conclusion one, which possibly answers how to write or at least remember the WHO classification of soft tissue, and then write the answer if the question comes as classification of soft tissue tumors or soft tissue sarcomas. Coming to section 2. We'll talk about, we all know about the prognostic significance of margin width for extremity sarcomas, and if the margins are 1 cm or more, it independently predicts longer local recurrence-free intervals. Now that was a paper in the Journal of Surgical Oncology in 2004, and after 12 years or after a decade again in the same journal, They mentioned that accurate pathologic assessment of margins is important, ideally done on permanent rather than frozen sections. The consensus guidelines give the soft recommendation of 1 cm as an adequate margin width. Coming to one more paper where you looked at almost more than 2,000 localized primary adult STS and positive microscopic resection margins significantly decrease the local recurrence-free survival rate. Yet another study of close to 1,000 patients at a single institution, positive surgical margins, the adverse prognostic effect is more pronounced for those patients who escape an early relapse of the disease. And then this paper looked at more than 1,000 patients and told us that the independent adverse prognostic factors for distant recurrence, distant metastasis, and disease-specific survival is different from those identified for subsequent local recurrences. For instance, they found out for distant recurrence the tumor size, the tumor depth, the tumor grade, and the tumor histology would predict for distant recurrence. And lastly, therefore, let's have a new look at the old predictors to find out that the hazard ratios range between 3.2 and 4.5 for tumor size, tumor depth, and the tumor grade, and this has the most effect on the risk of metastasis. Whereas the 10-year chance of local recurrence is linked to the surgical margin status with a p-value of less than 0.001. So these predictors of the initial surgery performed and the initial tumor biology factors give us the second conclusion for today evening. The largest series have shown how the disease biology, the tumor size, the tumor depth, the tumor location, the tumor histology, and the tumor grade governs the early outcome, whereas the quality of surgical margins strongly predicts for late related deaths. In other words, conclusion 2, patients who survive the biology of the tumor have a higher risk of death if microscopic margins are positive after the initial resection. So with that, I come to section 3 of my talk, and we'll discuss about some treatment now. And we know that some of the histologies are anthracycline sensitive. The three most common ones which we discussed was LPS, liposarcoma, LMS, leiomyosarcoma, and UPS. All three are anthracycline sensitive. The next is angiosarcoma. Again, it responds to anthracyclines, but unlike all other sarcomas, angiosarcomas also respond very well to taxanes. So much so that in many centers, the preferred first-line treatment of choice for angiosarcomas is to use taxane-based treatments rather than anthracyclines. And then we have three more histologies: epithelioid sarcoma, synovial sarcoma, and MPNST. All of them are labeled as anthracycline-sensitive histologies. We now come to the EORTC 62012 trial, which looked at the anthracycline doxorubicin as single agent compared to the combination of doxorubicin and ifosfamide. The response is a combination doubled from 14% to 26%. The median PFS almost doubled from 4.6 to 7.4 months, but there was no difference in the median overall survival. So which are the patients who should be given the combination of doxorubicin plus ifosfamide, because the median OS anyway is not going to change if it's a locally advanced, unresectable, or a metastatic high-grade anthracycline sensitive soft tissue sarcomas? Whenever the disease is so locally advanced, it's abutting, for instance, here the sciatic nerve and causing compressive and troublesome symptoms, and you want rapid symptomatic relief, prefer choosing a combination of doxorubicin plus ifosfamide. Or when the tumor, like here, is a leiomyosarcoma of the retroperitoneum, which is near a critical structure. Now this has come from the IVC, and therefore you require the combination so that the tumor shrinks and therefore the critical structures are not further compromised. So it's a sarcoma causing lots of symptoms or impinging onto critical structures. Now these are the patients where you would prefer using a combination of doxorubicin plus ifosfamide if they are anthracycline sensitive histologies. Now there are some patients who might not be right candidates for doxorubicin. Then what do? The JETIS trial looked at the combination of gemcitabine docetaxel compared to doxorubicin, and the response rates were similar. The median PFS was 5.8, 5.9 months, and the median OS also was similar. There was no difference whatsoever in the response rates in the median PFS or the median OS. So for patients where you think you would want to avoid doxorubicin, you can get the similar benefit as doxorubicin with a combination of gemcitabine and docetaxel. So while the EORTC trial showed us that doxorubicin is as good as doxorubicin ifosfamide, the JETIS trial showed us that gemcitabine docetaxel is as good as doxorubicin. And then we tried to look at using an MAB in the management of soft tissue sarcoma. So doxorubicin got combined with olaratumab. Olaratumab initially in the initial phase 1b/2 trial showed very promising median OS of a difference. It almost doubled the median from less than 15 months to 26.5 months. And therefore the US FDA went to an approval in 2016. But the subsequent phase 3 trial, the announced trial, clearly showed that there was no advantage of adding olaratumab to doxorubicin. Therefore, the US FDA approval for olaratumab has been taken off, and now this drug is no longer discussed in the treatment of soft tissue sarcomas. We now come to pazopanib because your patient might not be able to take doxorubicin and is also not prone or not inclined to take the combination of gemcitabine docetaxel, is elderly more than 60 years and wants to avoid chemotherapy of any sort. Pazopanib is one of the several orally active small molecule inhibitors of various tyrosine kinases, including VEGFR and PDGFR alpha and beta. It's generally used as subsequent treatment for advanced SDS in those patients who have progressed on prior chemotherapy or other approved agents. Usually we don't use it for liposarcomas or GIST. Now, in older adults, it's one drug which can be used as an initial treatment options if the patient has an anthracycline sensitive histology. The 7 of them I listed before, and the patient cannot tolerate or the patient wants to avoid the potential toxicities of doxorubicin. And this conclusion has come from this German intergroup study where they compared pazopanib to doxorubicin as first-line treatment in patients who are 60 years or older. This was published in the JCO last year, and the median PFS and the median overall survival are similar with regard to pazopanib and doxorubicin. So pazopanib was non-inferior to doxorubicin in its efficacy against adult STS in patients who are 60 years or more. It was superior to your right-hand side with regard to the adverse event profile in terms of much less numbers of neutropenia and febrile neutropenia. So we should always not impinge upon using aggressive treatments to our patients, because sometimes you end up saying the story getting changed like this, that you have got 6 months to live, dear patient. But with aggressive treatment like drug combinations of doxorubicin and ifosfamide for a patient who really will not benefit from that, if the patient wants to avoid a combination of gemcite, dosi, or doesn't want chemotherapy altogether, by giving these aggressive treatments, you can help them feel that they have lived longer, and we only make it seem that much longer. Pazopanib is an equally valid option in older patients who are more than 60 years and who you think cannot tolerate chemotherapy, or if the patient thinks he does not want chemotherapy at all. So conclusion 3 is about the initial systemic therapy for advanced progressive soft tissue sarcomas, and you should actually ask 5 questions so that you can accordingly go through this flow chart. The first question is this patient having a anthracycline histology or not? If no, then you can select an initial approach based on histology. If yes, then if that is angiosarcoma, as I told you, you can always use taxane-based therapy, which is my preference also over doxorubicin-based therapy. And if it's not the angiosarcoma, then the third question to be asked is, so it is a histology sensitive to anthracyclines. It's not an angiosarcoma. So if the patient is having a good performance status and minimal comorbidities, if that's not the case, then you can always choose gemcitabine monotherapy or a gemcitabine based combination or only single agent pegylated liposomal doxorubicin. But if the patient has a good performance status and has minimal comorbid conditions, then you need to answer the fourth question, is doxorubicin contraindicated or not? For example, the patient might be having clinical heart failure for whatever reasons, and if doxorubicin is contraindicated, then you can go for gemcitabine based combination like gemcitabine and docetaxel, because the patient has a good performance status and has otherwise minimal comorbidities. If doxorubicin can be administered and is not contraindicated, then the fifth question, the last question to be asked is the patient highly symptomatic? Is the disease near a critical structure causing lot of troublesome symptoms, and therefore you want tumor shrinkage as the primary goal? If that's the case, then choose the combination of doxorubicin and ifosfamide. Otherwise, you can use only single agent doxorubicin. So my conclusion 3 ends with this flow chart, starting from asking these 5 questions and then answering them yes or no, so that you come to the most appropriate treatment option for your patient of advanced progressive soft tissue sarcoma. Coming to section 4, I'll touch upon a drug by name trabectedin, which is indicated for the treatment of patients of advanced STS after anthracyclines and ifosfamide have failed and who are unsuited to receive these agents. Now, this drug binds to the minor groove of the DNA, and the efficacy data is based mainly on liposarcoma and leiomyosarcoma patients. Now, unlike other drugs, this drug is not an intercalating molecule. It binds the minor groove of the DNA helix. And in 2005, an EORTC group led by Lee Cessna looked at more than 100 patients, a phase 2 trial, and found that the partial response rates are less than 10% with trabectedin, but the disease control rate was as high as 51%. The French sarcoma group, after a decade in 2015, looked now at close to 900 patients and retrospectively analyzed them and those patients who got trabectedin, and again the response was less than 20%, but the disease control rate was as high as 67%. In those patients who continued trabectedin up to disease progression, the median PFS was close to 12 months or 1 year, and median OS was more than 2 years. So these were phase 2 or retrospective data, but then they showed that the partial responses are much less, but the stable disease as the best response is in the range of 40 to 50%. Let's now look at a phase 3 randomized multi-center trial where they looked at trabectedin and compared it to dacarbazine in patients of LPS and LMS who have failed conventional chemotherapy. Again, the partial responses were less than 10% with trabectedin, but stable disease as best response in more than 50% of patients. The median PFS and TTP was 4.2, which was 2.5 times more than the dacarbazine arm. And finally, we look at this study which looked at trabectedin compared to best supportive care in patients having translocation related sarcomas. Now that's one important term which we need to know. So sarcomas having chromosomal translocations like myxoid liposarcoma, round cell liposarcoma, synovial sarcoma, alveolar soft part sarcoma, clear cell sarcomas, DFSP, etc. So these are called as translocation related sarcomas. And here too, the partial responses were less than 10%, and the stable disease rate was close to 60%. So across a phase 2 trial, retrospective data of almost 900 patients, randomized phase 3 trial, and a randomized open label phase 2 study in translocation related sarcomas, this drug gives you partial responses of less than 10%, but the stable disease has been always in excess of 50%. And that translates to an improvement in PFS and overall survival. And that's my conclusion for today. Trabectedin is an active agent for advanced soft tissue sarcoma. When we say active, we realize that the objective response rates by the conventional RECIST criteria is fairly low, but the experience with this drug has underscored the relevance of stable disease as a beneficial endpoint for metastatic soft tissue sarcoma in general. So in an asymptomatic patient who is not much troubled by the disease, a drug, if it's producing stable disease, can be continued till progressive disease or unacceptable side effects. So that's what the trabectedin trials have taught us. That objective response is not the goal of treatment unless the patient is quite symptomatic or you have the disease impinging on a critical structure. Stable disease is as good, and that's the relevance in metastatic soft tissue sarcoma in general. Fifth slide. Soft tissue sarcoma, we discussed about the histologic landscape. I also mentioned about translocation related sarcomas, and therefore the genomic landscape is shown in this slide, where you look at various sarcoma subtypes and you can find so many genomic aberrations or genomic imbalances. What would be ideal would be to look at these targets and then use therapeutics and try to see how we can get maximal benefit, since we know the cytogenetics of these tumors. And that has ranged from CAR T cell therapies to recombinant vaccinia GM-CSF to cytotoxic T lymphocytes and to immunotherapies as well. So you could have a sarcoma which has multiple complex genomics, or you could also have sarcomas with simple genomics, and that's what is listed here. Now, when I say this, what it means is that in that particular soft tissue sarcoma, a significant proportion of patients have just a single translocation, which possibly is driving the sarcoma. For example, 90% of patients having dermatofibrosarcoma protuberance have translocation 1722. 50% of inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors have the ALK rearrangement of the ALK fusion, and we have drugs which can target the ALK. So that's what I did tell you about one patient, one question talking about the translational research. So what is translational research? You discover, and you have the application of discoveries and technology and basic science research, and you apply that to a clinical setting, and that is the basis of translational research. So translating what you found in the bench to the bedside, that will help us in identifying novel drug targets. And if you have novel drug targets, you could have normal treatment strategies which is suited to that particular patient who is having that particular tumor. You therefore are looking at a tailored treatment or an individualized treatment, especially in the metastatic setting. So we are moving from the empirical treatment based on clinical features, radiology or pathology, to a standard of care in the form of using target therapies based on the molecular profile of the tumor. So that's what is meant when an examiner asks you translational research in the arena of advanced soft tissue sarcomas. So we'll now focus on translational research. The reason why I think there is a pretty high chance that these type of questions are likely to come either this year or next in theory is because so many drugs have recently got approved in the field of soft tissue, especially the last year in 2020. You have so many approvals by the US FDA in various subtypes of soft tissue sarcomas. So let's start with imatinib, which got approved in CML in 2001, and that we know now is for chronic phase as well as upfront. And then suddenly the drug got approved for 5 rare life-threatening disorders in 2006 after 5 years. One was a solid tumor, a sarcoma by name, as I told you, dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, and the other 4 were the hematologic neoplasms. I did show you one question where they asked about imatinib for non-CML diseases. So this could be the answer there, where it can be used for treatment of dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans and also for MDS, MPT, for pH positive ALL, for hypereosinophilic syndrome or CEL, and also for aggressive systemic mastocytosis. Approvals for all 5 of them happened at a time in November 2006. We know now that this drug is the standard first-line treatment option for GIST and also in the adjuvant treatment of GIST, where you give it for 36 months. And when you take it for 36 months, the 5-year OS is 92 months. When compared to those patients who take it for 1 year, where the 5-year OS is around 82%. From then on, 33 years of adjuvant imatinib has become standard. And in 2013, imatinib got approved for pediatric ALL, for pH positive pediatric ALL. So imatinib has a lot of indications beyond CML, and these are the indications which I listed. November 2018, a drug called as larotrectinib got approved for solid tumors having anti-RK gene fusions. Now the question in your DM examinations could be recent advances in any of the cancers, in any of the solid tumors. I think 3 things you can always employ across all the solid tumors. Number 1 is a tumor which harbors the anti-RK gene fusion. You have 2 drugs, larotrectinib and entrectinib. Both of them can be used if you are able to find the anti-RK gene fusion. And the approvals have happened in the last 1 to 2 years only. Secondly, if a patient has MSI high tumor, as second line, there is a blanket approval for pembrolizumab. And the third is pembrolizumab for those tumors, solid tumors having high tumor mutation burden. So these 3 things can be used to answer advances in the medical oncology across all solid tumors. So November 2018, larotrectinib for solid tumors anti-RK gene fusions. Infantile fibrosarcoma typically has the anti-RK fusions, and this is how the response happens to larotrectinib. Now this was a pooled data of 3 phase 1, phase 2 trials, and the response rates are 96%. In fact, this drug works against all tumors who are harboring the anti-RK fusion. Now, usually you find the anti-RK fusion commonly happening in those patients who have rare diseases like secretory carcinoma of the breast, like infantile fibrosarcoma, or congenital mesoblastic nephroma. So now, pexidartinib got approved in August 2019 for tenosynovial giant cell tumor. So pexidartinib targets something called as the CSF1 receptor. Entrectinib got approved in August 2019, the same month, for anti-RK solid tumors and ROS1 positive non-small cell lung cancer. Jan 2020, a year back, a drug by name avapritinib for GIST with a rare mutation of the PDGFR in the exon 18 including something called as D842V. Jan 2020, same month, 1 year back, tazemetostat for advanced epithelioid sarcoma. This drug by name ripretinib is useful in GIST patients who have already failed imatinib and sunitinib and regorafenib, and still you find good responses happening as the fourth line treatment, and that was the Invictus trial. Pembrolizumab got approved for MSI high solid tumors in May 2017, but in June 2020, the FDA also approved for children having TMB, for adults and children having TMB high solid tumors, including sarcomas. So as you can see, in the last year, in 2020, so many new approvals happened in the management of soft tissue sarcomas, and therefore there's a pretty good chance that that the novel treatment or translational research, the way it has impacted the treatment of these soft tissue, will be asked in any of your examinations. Now, 1 to 5% of patients of sarcomas would be possibly having MSI high, and similarly less than 5% of patients would be having TMB high. That could be sarcomas or mesothelioma or prostate cancer. And whenever you find that TMB is high, then you can always think of using pembrolizumab for adults and children with TMB high solid tumors. What's the meaning of TMB high? 10 or more than 10 mutations per megabase. So that was, now it's not possible always to have a randomized trial looking at such a rare tumor. See, sarcomas STS accounts for 1% of all adult cancers. And of that 1%, we are now talking about these rare 1%. And so you might not always have a randomized trial. And that's my conclusion 6, that every time you don't require a randomized control trial. Parachutes reduce the risk of injury after gravitational challenge, but their effectiveness has not been proved in randomized control trials. Now, I would just stop here shortly for 30 seconds to just inform the audience that I am not, I actually prepared the lecture for approximately an hour, and I thought that any questions, etc., can be always sent by a text or a WhatsApp to me, and I can respond to it. So shall I continue with the remaining part of my talk for the coming 10 to 15 minutes? Vishwanath or Manoj?
Please, sir. Yeah, please, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So coming to section 7, let's talk about GI stromal tumor shortly. So a KIT exon 11 mutation, KIT exon 9 mutation, and PDGFR commonly happen. These are targetable alterations, and the drug of choice in these 85% of patients is imatinib. But an occasional patients may not respond to imatinib at all. That's because this patient might be having a PDGFR alpha exon 18 mutation. This drug doesn't work there, and the prognosis of PDGFRA D842V is the worst. That's dismal prognosis. So this was a 62 years old man who had epithelioid cyst in the stomach with multiple liver mets, and the biopsy showed that it was PDGFRA D842V mutation. Then here, imatinib does not work. So what do we use? We use a drug by name avapritinib, which is active against the PDGFRA exon 18 mutations. The approval happened based on a phase 1 navigator study where the response rates in patients having exon 18 mutation PDGFRA was 86% and 95% of patients had tumor reduction. When used as 4th line or beyond, the response rate still was a good 22%. Now, genotyping therefore should be performed whenever you plan medical therapy. If it is KIT or PDGFR alpha wild type, then always assess the SDHB status, the succinate dehydrogenase B status. And if it is SDS deficient, then the treatment of choice is regorafenib, which gives you a 100% clinical benefit rate. So 6 patients, all 6 of them in SDS deficient GIST responded to regorafenib or had a clinical benefit. Now, imatinib as first line works for around 2 years, and then you change to sunitinib. It works for around 6 months, and when that fails, you choose regorafenib, which works for approximately 4.8 months. So, which means that you have diminishing returns as you go from first line to second line to third line. Now, this female had multiple liver mets from a large small bowel tumor metastatic GIST, and she had a KIT exon 11 mutations. Therefore, she got imatinib 400 mg daily. If it's exon 9 mutation, then you go up to 800 mg once daily. And how do you further improve upon this? You can add binimetinib to imatinib, and the response rates with regard to RECIST are around 67%. When you use the CHOI criteria of these 39 patients, 37% of patients have partial responses. I told you about trabectedin. It's more about stable disease. If you assess this drug in GIST by looking at RECIST, then you will find that the partial responses are far less. Now, 39 patients, 26 had confirmed partial response. When you assessed by the CHOI criteria, then of 39, 37% patients actually had partial responses. So the CHOI and the EORTC criteria were a secondary endpoint in this trial of using imatinib plus binimetinib as the first line treatment of choice. When imatinib fails, because it works on KIT and PDGFR-A only, you now use Sutent. Why Sutent works? Because it goes beyond KIT and PDGFR-A to also target the VEGFR 1, 2, and 3. It works for approximately 6 months, and when Sutent fails, you put these patients on regorafenib. Why does it work? It works beyond KIT, PDGFR-A, and VEGFR to also inhibit RET, RAF1, BRAF, and FGF receptor, and therefore, as you keep on going from first to second to third line, you keep on broadening the inhibition of multiple kinases. Now, why do these drugs fail? Because initially you had exon 11 and exon 9 mutations, or exon 9 mutations. These drugs fail because now you tell mutations in the ATP binding or the activation loop, which is between exon 13, 14, 17, and 18. So because of these activating mutations, the secondary mutations will then be able to make the initial drugs become less effective or ineffective. Now, this drug by name ripretinib is a switch-controlled tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It again targets the same KIT and PDGFR-A like imatinib, but through a dual mechanism of action. It not only binds the switch pocket, it also binds the ATP activation loop, and therefore the kinase remains constantly in the inactive state. The phase 1 trial showed efficacy in the 4th line setting. We'll spend time to understand that the ATP pocket is where imatinib binds and displaces ATP, and therefore the subsequent substrate can't bind. The switch pocket there is what happens when a mutation happens, so that the switch is now constantly kept on and the ATP pocket is always available for the ATP to come and get lodged there. Now, ripretinib is able to attach itself to both the ATP pocket and the switch pocket, and therefore it's a switch control TKI. To make it further understandable to you, this is a kinase. The black in the center is where is the switch pocket there. Now, when this kinase is inactive, then the red portion there is the activation switch, which is off, and therefore it is not sitting in the switch pocket. When it becomes active, then it switches on and reaches and blocks the switch pocket. Therefore, you now see that the activation loop has opened up, and that's where ATP can come and bind on the left side. So this is the switch pocket, which is right now visible to us because it is not occupied by the switch. And then you find now when the conformational change happens, the switch is occupied by because it's it is active state now. So phosphate group attaches here, and the switch now becomes active and therefore blocks the switch pocket. the activation loop is now open and ATP comes and binds there. Once ATP binds there, it's now ready to donate the phosphate group to the next subsequent kinase to activate that, and therefore the next kinase comes and attaches substrate site, and then the phosphate from ATP gets donated to it. Now the initial kinase has ADP, and by transferring the phosphate group, the second kinase becomes active and activates downstream signals. So once that has happened, the ADP then dislocates and the phosphate also dislocates, and again you see that this kinase becomes inactive because the switch pocket in center can be seen. Now what ripretinib does is it binds the switch pocket and the activation loop, and therefore the kinase always remains in an inactive state only. So therefore this is a switch control TKI. The phase 3 trial of 154 patients looked at 150 mg OD of ripretinib compared to placebo to give you a median PFS of 6.5 months, almost 5.5 month advantage. You can see in the right to the right, the PFS curves and the OS curves are separating very well. Now the OS, you don't find a p-value there because the overall response rate was not significant statistically, which is what we see commonly whenever trials follow a hierarchical testing. Alopecia can happen with this drug, and therefore your patient needs to be warned about alopecia. The INTRIGUE trial, because the activity of this drug has been so intriguing, is now looking at Sutent compared to ripretinib after imatinib fails. Results are expected this year, and the results may lead to paradigm shifting change in clinical practice with Sutent, which might get displaced if this drug is able to show superiority over Sutent as second line. Section 7, I think it's only 8 o'clock. So what do I do?
Yes, sir. Please continue, sir.
Okay, so we have something called as INI, the integrase interaction factor 1 or INI1, and this checks proliferation and it promotes differentiation inside the nucleus. So basically it keeps the cell cycle in check and makes the cell to go in the direction towards differentiation, and ultimately when its lifespan gets over, it gets apoptosed. In epithelioid sarcomas, 90% of these sarcomas do not have the INI or the INI1, which means you will have increased proliferation, no maturation, no differentiation and evasion of apoptosis. 40%, 50% of epithelioid MPNSTs also lack the INI1 expression. So when INI1 is lost, the enhancer of Just homologue 2 EZH2 now becomes active, and therefore the chromatin remains condensed. Once the chromatin is condensed, then proliferation will be increased because the apoptotic signals are stopped. In those tumors where there is INI deficiency, INI loss, like here, you use a drug by name tazemetostat, which basically is able to influence the activity of EZH2 and inhibit the activity of EZH2. So what EZH2 does is basically a methyl transferase. It takes a methyl group from S-adenosyl methionine and transfers it to the genes which are responsible for causing apoptosis. So once the genes get methylated, they get silenced, and therefore apoptosis does not happen. So you use tazemetostat as a S-adenosyl methionine competitive inhibitor, and that would prevent the methyl groups from getting transferred to the genes which normally would then become active to cause apoptosis. So that's the fine balance in cells between INI and EZH2. So drugs like tazemetostat are EZH2 inhibitors, and that tilts the balance towards expressing those genes which will cause apoptosis. So this drug, 90% of epithelioid sarcomas are having INI1 loss, and therefore this enhanced activity of EZH2, and that's happening because this enzyme is able to transfer methyl groups to the apoptotic enzymes, making them inactive. Now this drug inhibits this methyl transferase, and therefore the median OS in these advanced tumors is as high as 20 months when you use tazemetostat. It comes as 200 mg tablet. One bottle has 240 tablets. The dose is 8 tablets per day, and therefore for 1 month it's 240 tablets, and the cost for 1 month is $24,000 US. Section 8 is about tenosynovial giant cell tumor. So you have here a tendon sheath tumor, therefore teno, or here the synonym, therefore tenosynovial giant cell tumor. Now this can be a rare but debilitating disease which causes severe functional problems, and therefore what drives the cell is elaboration of colony stimulating factor 1 from the cancer cell, which works on the macrophages, and therefore lot of inflammation which leads to lot of swelling. It also is able to further activate the own receptors on the cancer cell, if it causing more and more autoproliferation. A drug by name pexidartinib is basically a drug which is a CSF1 receptor antagonist, and this drug has received US FDA approval in the year 2020 because it produced response rates of 39%, 15% complete responses, 25% partial responses. Now this was RECIST, but when they looked at something called as the tumor volume, you can see here how the disease has come down by using this drug by name pexidartinib, and they are looking at tumor volume score. And when you look at tumor volume score and not RECIST, then the response rates from 40% now become 56%, because you look at the disease as a volume of the normal synovial cavity. And when that is taken as the criteria of assessing the response, you find that the response rates become not 40% but 56%. It's available as a 200 mg capsule. Another few more slides. Dermatofibrosarcoma protuberance of the breast, a rare case report, a lot of these spindle cells there involving the dermis, and they are fibrosarcomatous in nature. DFSP is between dermatofibroma and frank fibrosarcoma. It's positive for CD34, and usually they protrude outside the dermis from where they arise, like breast here or in the extremity here. The translocation 1722 is what is specific in DFSP 90% of these patients, and with that there is activation of the platelet derived growth factor receptor beta, because you find more and more elaboration of PDGF beta, and that leads to activation of PDGFR, causing dermatofibrosarcoma protuberance. And we know imatinib is a drug which is a PDGF inhibitor or PDGFR inhibitor, and therefore this drug is very useful in patients who are having dermatofibrosarcoma protuberance. Shown here is the response by using imatinib across the extremity and also inside the abdomen. Inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor, epithelioid cells, but small lymphocytes in background, plasma cells in background, dense fibrous tumor, therefore it's an inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor. 50% of them are ALK negative, but 50% are ALK positive, and the FISH is negative here, which is positive in 50% of inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors, as seen in this slide. So what works? You can have multiple partners. In this case, it was a RAN BP2 at exon 18, binding to ALK exon 20, the baseline abdominal scan, liver mets and mesenteric masses. Crizotinib is an ALK inhibitor and is a drug used in this disease with regard to the CREATE trial, which showed the excellent efficacy of crizotinib in patients who are ALK positive and are having IMFT. The 2-year OS PFS rate was as high as close to 50%. And this is one patient who is responding so beautifully to crizotinib. Section 11 is about alveolar soft part sarcoma. Again, the translocation induces MET, and that leads to proliferation and new vessel formation. The drug which can be used is pazopanib or cediranib or a combination of immunotherapy molecules. Last part of my talk, section 12, will focus on PEComas. PEC standing for perivascular epithelioid cell. This family of tumors are mesenchymal tumors. They have myomelanocytic differentiation, lymphangioliomyomatosis in the lung, renal angiomyolipoma, PEComas, usually benign, a subset may malignant with invasive recurrences or development of distant mets. 2007, 61 years old male, renal tumor. 2014, lung metastasis, but no symptoms. 2015, biopsied, no symptoms, therefore wait and watch approach. In 2016, mildly symptomatic, multiple nodules, biopsy confirmed a non-TSC related PEComa, confirmed by morphology and IHC. As I told you, it's a myomelanocytic difference. So myo means smooth muscle markers, HMB45 as the melanocytic marker. Now you find almost a vast proportion of these patients having problem in the tuberous sclerosis 1 or 2 gene, and with that, when these tumor suppressor genes are inactivated, you find this activation of the mTOR complex or the mTOR pathway. And what can target the mTOR pathway? Drugs like sirolimus, everolimus, or temsirolimus. I end my talk by telling you about this patient of renal tumor who had multiple pulmonary mets and how the mets went down over a period of 18 months by using a simple oral drug called as sirolimus. It also works against various external PEComas. Like here was a study of 5 patients where 4 of them responded to sirolimus, 3 of them are complete responses. This is a drug approved in the US for treatment of pulmonary lymphangioliomyomatosis. Is sirolimus available in India? I end my talk with this slide with Intas producing sirolimus, and so this drug can be used in those patients who have the PEComa family of tumors. Thank you so much, everybody. I understand that this might be the case. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful talk. The session is open for the questions.
I think it's only 8 and we can start the quiz because